The first thing I saw when I got back home wasn't my house. It wasn't the fence. It wasn't even the road I'd driven down 100 times before. It was the empty hole where my pond used to be. Not low water, not drought, just gone, like someone had reached into the ground and erased it. And standing on the other side of the fence, like he'd been waiting for me to notice, was my neighbor, arms crossed, smiling like he'd just finished a job he was proud of. I bought that land in late 2020, right before everything got weird in the world. 5 acres out in eastern Kentucky, nothing fancy, just rolling grass, a couple patches of woods, and a small pond tucked near the back. The kind of place you don't buy because it makes sense on paper. You buy it because something in your chest settles the second you step onto it. The pond wasn't big, maybe the size of 2 pickup trucks parked side by side, but it held water year-round thanks to this old groundwater feed the previous owner had set up decades ago. It brought in frogs, herons, sometimes even deer in the early morning. I'd sit out back with my coffee and just watch it all happen like it didn't need me there at all, and somehow that made it feel more mine. Now, the man who owned the land to the north of me, his name was Victor Hale. Victor had about 10 acres, and from the moment I moved in, it was clear he didn't see land the way I did. Where I saw quiet, he saw potential revenue. Where I saw trees, he saw future structures. The guy was always pacing his property with a tape measure or talking on the phone about units and returns and seasonal bookings. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's his land, right? People can do what they want. The first real conversation we had about the pond was in early March. I remember because it was just starting to warm up, and the water had this soft ripple from the wind that made everything feel like spring was finally coming back. Victor walked over, leaned against the fence like we were old friends, and said, "Hey, you ever think about filling that thing in?" Just like that. No lead up. I laughed a little, thought he was joking. "No, not really." "What?" He pointed past my shoulder toward the pond. "That spot lines up perfect with where I'm planning my 3rd cabin. Got 2 already in progress, but that one, that's the moneymaker. Best view, best placement." I turned and looked at the water, then back at him. "Yeah, that's not happening." He didn't get mad. That was the weird part. He just nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. "All right," he said, calm as anything. Figured I'd ask. And that should have been the end of it. Honestly, I thought it was. About a month later, I got deployed overseas. I'm in the Army, been in long enough to know that when you leave, life back home doesn't pause for you. Still, I locked everything up, checked the property lines, made sure nothing looked off, and I left thinking the worst thing I'd come back to would be overgrown grass and a mailbox full of junk. I was gone 8 months. 8 months of dust, noise, and that constant low hum of tension that never really leaves your body when you're out there. And the whole time, in the back of my head, I'd picture that pond. Not in some poetic way, just small things, like how the light hits it at sunset, or the way the frogs get loud right after it rains. It was grounding, something simple I could return to. So when I finally got back in December, I didn't even go inside the house first. I dropped my bag on the porch, walked straight around to the back, and that's when everything kind of stopped making sense. The pond wasn't just low. It wasn't dried up from weather. The entire system had been torn apart. The inlet pipe that fed it had been cut clean through. Along the edge of my property, there was a freshly dug drainage trench redirecting the water away like someone had engineered it that way on purpose. The basin itself, cracked mud, brittle reeds, everything dead or dying. It looked like something abandoned for years, not months. And then I noticed the gravel. Right up against the edge where the water used to be, there was a leveled pad, covered in crushed stone, square, measured, deliberate. Foundation prep. I stood there for a long time, just trying to catch up with what I was seeing, and then I heard his voice. "Hey," Victor called out, like we were just neighbors exchanging small talk. I turned, walked up to the fence, and for a second I didn't even know what to say. My brain was still trying to find a version of this where it wasn't exactly what it looked like. "What happened to my pond?" I asked, and my voice came out quieter than I expected. Victor shrugged, like the question barely mattered. "It was causing drainage issues on my side. Water kept pooling near my builds. Had to reroute it." "You rerouted it?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, nodding toward the trench. "Got someone in. We fixed it. Honestly, you're better off. That thing was just sitting there anyway." I stared at him for a second, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You went onto my property, cut my water source, and drain my pond. He tilted his head slightly, like I was overreacting. The inlet runs close to the boundary. I checked. It's basically shared. It's not shared, I said, sharper now. Did you get permission from me? He hesitated, just a fraction. I talked to someone about it. Who? Another pause. Longer this time. I don't remember exactly. Some guy county, maybe. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. The kind that settles in your chest when you realize the other person already decided your side of the story didn't matter. I nodded once, stepped back from the fence. All right, I said. We're done talking. And as I walked back toward the house, I could feel his eyes on me, probably expecting yelling, threats, something loud. But I didn't have that in me right then. What I had was quieter, heavier. Because I knew this wasn't just about a pond anymore. It was about someone looking at something that was mine and deciding it wasn't anymore. And the worst part, he thought he'd already won. I didn't sleep much that first night back. Not because of jet lag or anything like that. I've dealt with worse schedules and worse places. It was the quiet that got to me. Or more specifically, what was missing from it. No frogs. No insects humming near the water. No soft movement from something stepping along the edge of the pond. Just still air and this strange, hollow silence that didn't belong there. It felt like walking into a house where someone had taken all the furniture, same structure, but something essential was gone. By morning, I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that loud, reactive way people expect. It had settled into something colder, more focused. I made coffee, sat on the back porch, and looked out over that dry basin like I was studying a problem that needed solving. Because that's what it was now. A problem. And I've learned over the years, problems don't care how you feel about them. You either deal with them right, or you live with the consequences. The first call I made was to a guy named Aaron Pierce. He's a hydrologist out of Lexington, someone a buddy of mine had recommended a while back when I was asking questions about maintaining the pond. At the time, I never needed him. Now, I needed him bad. He showed up 2 days later in an old truck that looked like it had seen more field work than pavement. Quiet guy, late 40s maybe, the kind of person who doesn't waste words because he doesn't need to. We walked the property together, and I let him take his time. He crouched near the cut pipe, ran his hand along the edge of the trench, dug into the soil with a small tool he carried in his pocket. Every now and then he'd nod to himself, like pieces were clicking into place. After about an hour, he stood up, brushed his hands off, and looked out over the basin. This wasn't an accident, he said. I figured, I replied. He pointed toward where the inlet used to feed in. That system's been here a long time. Whoever cut it knew exactly what they were doing. And this trench, he gestured toward the channel along the boundary. This redirects groundwater flow. Not just surface water. They didn't just drain your pond. They changed how water moves through this entire patch of land. I felt my jaw tighten slightly. Can it be fixed? He exhaled slowly, thinking about it. Yeah, but not cheap. You're looking at 40, maybe 60 grand, depending on how much recharge you can get back. And even then, it won't be exactly what it was. There it was. A number. Something concrete. Something real. Put it in writing, I said. He gave me a small nod. I will. Now here's the thing about people like Victor. They're used to dealing with problems that can be negotiated down. Money here, compromise there, handshake at the end. He probably thought worst case scenario. I'd come back, we'd argue, and he'd cut me a check just big enough to make the inconvenience go away. What he didn't understand was that he hadn't just created a financial problem. He'd created a legal one, and not the small kind. A couple days after Aaron left, I made another call. This one took a bit more digging, a few transfers, and one very patient woman on the phone who kept asking me to clarify exactly what had been altered. When I finished explaining, there was a pause on the line, the kind that makes you sit up a little straighter. Sir, she said finally, you might want to contact the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, I'll be honest. I didn't think much of that at first. I figured maybe it was some regulatory thing, paperwork, maybe a fine if anything. But I called anyway, left a message, gave them the details. They called me back the same day. And the tone, completely different. Direct. Focused. No small talk. The man on the line asked me a series of very specific questions. Soil type. Vegetation. Seasonal water presence. I answered what I could, told him about the cattails, the way the pond held water through summer, the groundwater feed. Another pause. Based on what you're describing, he said, that area likely qualifies as a jurisdictional wetland. I leaned back in my chair, not fully understanding yet. Okay, and what does that mean? It means, he said, calm and precise, that altering it without a permit could be a violation of federal law. That was the moment everything shifted. Not emotionally, strategically. Because suddenly, this wasn't just me versus Victor. This was Victor versus something a lot bigger than either of us. Within a week, they had someone out on the property. Different from Aaron. More official. Clipboard, measurements, photographs, soil samples. They didn't rush. They didn't speculate. They just documented everything with this quiet, methodical certainty that made it clear. This process had weight behind it. Victor noticed, of course. Hard not to when you've got government trucks parked near your fence line. He came over that afternoon, trying to look casual, but there was something tighter in his posture now. Less confidence. Hey, he said, nodding toward the people working. What's all this? I took a sip of my coffee, didn't rush my answer. Just having the property looked at. By who? Army Corps of Engineers. You could actually see the moment that landed. His expression didn't collapse or anything dramatic. It just shifted, like a calculation had suddenly changed variables he didn't account for. Well, he said, forcing a small laugh. That seems a little excessive, don't you think? I shrugged. Depends on what you did. He didn't respond right away. Just nodded once slow. All right. Well, if there's an issue, we can handle it like neighbors. I looked at him then, really looked. You stopped being a neighbor when you stepped onto my land and decided it was yours to change. That hit. I could tell. He gave a tight smile, the kind people use when they're trying to hold on to control of a situation that's slipping. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. But it already was. He just didn't know how big yet. A few days later, I got a call from a lawyer. Not mine, his. Smooth voice, practiced tone. The kind of guy who's used to resolving things quickly before they escalate. Mr. Carter, he said, I represent Mr. Hale. We understand there's been some concern regarding the drainage adjustments near your shared boundary. Concern, I repeated, almost to myself. Yes, he continued, unfazed. My client would like to offer a good faith resolution. $8,000, along with a formal written apology, to put this matter behind both parties. I let that sit for a second. 8,000. Aaron's estimate echoed in my head, 40 to 60. The silence stretched just long enough for him to think I was considering it. Then I said, you should probably tell your client to keep his money. A small pause. I'm sorry, because if what I'm being told is accurate, he's going to need it. That was the end of that call. 6 weeks later, the official notice came through. Federal letterhead. Clear language. No room for interpretation. Violation of the Clean Water Act. Unauthorized alteration of a jurisdictional wetland. Immediate cessation of all construction activity on the affected parcel. Mandatory submission of a restoration plan at his expense. I didn't go over to his property when he got it. Didn't need to. News like that travels fast in places like this. You start seeing fewer contractors, fewer trucks, fewer signs of progress. What I did do was sit back on my porch that evening, same spot as always, and look out over that empty basin again. Only now, it didn't feel like something lost. It felt like something waiting. By the time the letter hit Victor's mailbox, the whole tone of the situation had changed, not just for him, but for everyone who'd been quietly watching from a distance. Out here, people don't usually get involved in each other's business, but they notice things. They notice when construction suddenly stops, when trucks stop coming, when a man who used to walk his land like he owned the future starts spending more time on his phone than on his feet. And Victor, he changed. Not overnight. Not in some dramatic way, but you could see it in the details. The way he avoided eye contact if we happened to be outside at the same time. The way his posture tightened whenever another vehicle pulled up near his property line, like he was bracing for bad news before he even knew what it was. About 2 weeks after the notice, he came over again. No confidence this time. No casual lean against the fence. He stood a few feet back, hands in his jacket pockets, like he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to get anymore. Hey, he said, quieter than I'd ever heard him. I was on the porch, same chair, same view, or what used to be a view. I set my coffee down and walked over, but I didn't open the gate. What's up? He cleared his throat. This thing with the Corps, it's gotten a little out of hand. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Out of hand? Yeah, he said quickly. They're talking about violations, restoration plans, permits, stuff that doesn't need to go that far. We can fix this between us. There it was again. That word fix. Like this was still something small. How? I asked. He stepped a little closer now, sensing an opening. I'll cover the damage. More than before. 50,000. Cash if you want. We'll bring in someone, restore the pond, make it right. For a second, I just looked at him. Not angry, not satisfied, just measuring. Because part of me understood exactly what he was trying to do. He wasn't offering fairness. He was trying to stop the bleeding. You don't get it, I said finally. His jaw tightened. Then help me understand. This stopped being between you and me the second you decided you didn't need my permission, I told him. You didn't just damage my property, you broke federal law. That doesn't go away because you write a bigger check. His expression shifted, frustration creeping in now. So what? You're just going to let them bury me over this? I held his gaze. You buried yourself. That was the last real conversation we ever had. After that, everything moved through official channels. Engineers, inspectors, paperwork, lots of paperwork. The kind that drags on for months, then years, until it wears you down just by existing. Victor had to hire environmental consultants, submit detailed restoration plans, get approvals for every step. And none of it was optional. The cost alone, around $75,000 just for the mandated restoration. That didn't include the legal fees, the penalties, the delays. And the delays were what really hurt him. See, his whole plan depended on timing. Financing windows, contractor schedules, seasonal bookings, all of it lined up like dominoes that needed to fall in a certain order. And once the Corps stepped in, that order shattered. His permits for the third cabin? Suspended. The environmental review? Took 19 months. 19. By the time it was finally cleared, the market had shifted, his funding had dried up, and the contractors he'd lined up had moved on to other jobs. I heard through a mutual contact that he ended up selling off 2 of his planned cabin lots just to cover the mounting costs. And the one piece of land he'd wanted the most, the one right up against my property, where my pond used to be, he never touched it again. Couldn't really. Once something is classified and documented the way that area was, every move you make gets scrutinized. Every shovel of dirt becomes a question. As for me, I took a different route. The civil side of things wrapped up quietly compared to everything else. No big courtroom showdown, no dramatic verdict, just numbers agreed on paper. $51,000. Enough to do something meaningful, not just symbolic. I called Aaron back. Told him we were putting the pond back. This time, it wasn't just repair, it was restoration done right. Proper grading, reinforced inlet system, careful attention to how the water would flow and settle over time. It took a full season, start to finish. There were days it looked like nothing was happening, just dirt and equipment and slow, methodical work. But then the water started coming back. Not all at once, just a shallow layer at first, reflecting the sky like a mirror that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Then deeper, wider, until one morning I walked out with my coffee and saw ripples again. Real ones. The kind that move because something underneath is alive. The cattails came back on their own. Nobody planted them. They just returned, like they'd been waiting for the right conditions. A few weeks later, I spotted the first pair of ducks. Then more. Then frogs, loud as ever after a rainstorm, like they were making up for lost time. And just like that, the place felt whole again. Not exactly the same, but close enough that the difference didn't matter. Victor still owns his land. I see him sometimes, off in the distance, walking the edges like he used to, but slower now. More careful, like he understands something he didn't before. We don't talk. Not out of anger, just because there's nothing left to say. Some mornings, I sit on that back porch, coffee in hand, watching the water move, the ducks cutting across the surface, the trees swaying just enough to remind you the world keeps going whether you interfere with it or not. And I think about how close that all came to disappearing for good. And I think about choices. Because that's really what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not bad luck, just a series of choices. His and mine. He chose to take something that wasn't his, convinced himself it was justified, maybe even necessary. And I chose not to let that stand, even when it would have been easier to take the money and move on. So here's the question I keep coming back to. If you were standing where I stood, looking at something you cared about, something that mattered to you in a way that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, and someone decided it didn't matter at all, would you have done the same thing I did? Or would you have taken the deal and let it go? I'm genuinely curious where people land on that, because out here, lines get drawn in quiet ways, and once they're crossed, there's no pretending they weren't. Let me know what you think.